one of the most useful features in PHP is going to be the ability to include other PHP files in our PHP. Now, it might not be immediately obvious why that's going to be a good thing, but it's going to help us to not repeat ourselves. And that's always a good thing when we're coding. That's part of why we created functions, was so that we could not repeat ourselves with those functions by being able to call the same bits of code over and over again. And then when we want to make a change to the way the code works, we only have to change it in one place. Well, the same thing can be true with other files. And those files could contain our functions so that we can just simply bring in our functions each and every time we want to declare them again. Or they could include HTML, really just about anything else that we want to include in our file. So let's see how that's going to work. Let's start a new page. Let's do a save as on our headers page, and we're going to call this one includes. And I'm going to save that in my PHP sandbox, and I'm going to go ahead and take out everything that we were working with headers, because we're not going to be doing that now. We're going to be looking at include. So the easiest way for me to both show you how to use include and how useful it's going to be is if we create a second file as well. I'm going to create from the file menu just a new text file, and I'm going to save that file in my PHP sandbox, and I'm going to go ahead and call it included func.php. And that's going to be included functions. That's what I'm going for with that name. We already have functions in that folder, so I didn't want to call it functions again. So we'll call it included func. For the moment, let's just go ahead and put in the word functions. And we'll just save that file as it is. It just has the word functions in it. Let's come back over to our include, and let's use PHP open tags, and then put in include, and then the path to the file that we want to include, which is going to be included func.php. That's the file that I want to include. So with that single command, I've now included the contents of that file. Let's see if that works. I'll save includes. I'll jump back over to my web browser, and I will load up includes.php. And you'll see that it included functions. Now that makes a lot of sense to us. Now, it's a PHP file, and it's included something here that's just text. It wasn't inside PHP, and that's fine. It could be HTML. I could be loading in the header information, for example, that's going to be the same on all of my web pages. Or I could be loading in a bunch of PHP code. The one important thing to remember is that you're going to want to use the PHP tags if you have PHP code, even if in our includes file, it's inside these PHP tags. What happens is the process that include takes is it drops out of PHP mode to do the include, and then comes back into PHP mode as soon as it's done with it. So the file that's brought in, if it's PHP, you still need the tags. It won't assume that it's in PHP. It's going to assume you're back in HTML mode. So it's a good habit to be in to always make PHP delineated by these PHP tags, regardless of whether it's included or not. It may seem like a trivial point, but I just don't want you to make that mistake. So let's go ahead and define a function here now. Let's say function hello, and we'll go ahead and give it a name argument, and we'll put in a quick echo back, and the echo for that function is going to be hello to name. Easy enough, and we've seen plenty of this hello world stuff to last us a lifetime. So now you'll want to save that file, and then switch back over, and let's use another bit of PHP. And this time we're going to call the function, which is hello. And we'll give it the argument, which is everyone. So now, as you can expect, our function is being included, and then we're able to call it. So we'll come back, we'll reload it, and it works. Now, hopefully you see the power of this, because we can have one file when we're developing our application that includes all of our functions, or all of the functions that relate to a certain type. Maybe functions related to filling out a form, or functions related to retrieving information from the session variables. They can be in one file or many files, and included files can include other files. But this is how we're going to be able to structure our code in such a way that we don't have to edit the hello function on each and every page where it occurs. We can just include it one time. Now, there's a variation on include that we're also going to be using, and that is going to be require. And require does basically the same thing that include does, but it throws an error that if the file is not able to be loaded for some reason, if it can't be found, then it's going to throw a fatal error and not continue with the rest of the program. Include will try to load the file, but it won't generate an error. We may end up with errors later on. For example, when we try to call the hello function, that may throw an error, but we won't get an error because of the failure to include it. So we're going to handle it with require whenever it's something like functions that are definitely going to be required, and include whenever we're maybe loading in a bit of HTML or something that's not absolutely essential. So keep those as tools in your toolbox. There's one last variation on include and require that I want to bring up to you. And that's that if you remember with functions, one of the properties of functions is that we can only define them once. So it would be a terrible thing if we inadvertently required this file or included it and then did it again somewhere else, maybe because we included another file that also included it. So in order to keep ourselves from doing that, we can actually use require once, and it will keep track of it for us. It maintains an array that will say, this file has now been included, so therefore do not include it a second time. And that way we can make sure that the file gets included once, and if it comes up a second time and we require it a second time, it'll just ignore it and keep going because it knows it already has that file required. So that covers all the essentials that you need to know about how to include and require other PHP files into a PHP file that we want to work with. And we'll make good use of that once we start working with our application and we start building a structure where we can always include things like our functions or our database connectivity in our application. Now that we've learned how to work with PHP and we've learned all of these different techniques, we're pushing the limits of what we can do with a simple dynamic website. And sure, we can submit forms and we can work with that data, but we're starting to push the boundaries unless we introduce a database into this. And that's what I want to do now, is look at how we can start working with the MySQL database and bring that into the equation so that we can create full-featured web applications.